Hi, how are we doing? Good afternoon. I hope you're enjoying the conference. I feel a really good vibe today. And I have a quick talk for you about multi-tenancy on a front-end architecture using Nuxt. Just a show of hands who have heard about Vue.js or used Vue.js in the past. Awesome, awesome, cool stuff. Okay, so Nuxt is, for those of you who don't know, the equivalent of Next.js on React. And I'm going to be talking about how we can have a front-end architecture to power multi-tenants over just one code base. Who am I? My name is Rui. I work at a company called hosting.com. As the name tells you, it's on the hosting industry, so lots of DNS domains, servers, email configurations, managed WordPress instances, whatnot. I'm part of a few communities, and those are my socials where I'm not very active. There's the GitHub if you want to follow. Cool. So what I have for you today is talk a little bit about what I mean by multi-tenant, what was the stack and tools that I used to achieve this architecture, show you a diagram of said architecture, and then talk a little bit about theming. Theming is a very important problem to solve on multi-tenancy. So how do you have different colors or even different CSS for different clients using the same code base, which is really interesting in my opinion. Then I'm going to give you a hint on how to deploy those multi-tenants. So for those of you that work on DevOps, this should be a little bit interesting as well. And tell you just really quick about the future of the project and what some problems might be with this solution. There's a monorepo template repository on GitHub under Vue.js-pt GitHub organization, which is the community that I'm representing today, Portugal.vue. You can follow us, you can go on the website, Vue.js.pt, and we have a Slack community and a meetup.com group that we do some meetups in Porto, Lisbon, and sometimes even remote, if you want to participate. So really quick on multi-tenant, why this is a problem. So let's say you have one client, the red one, that comes to you and says, like, I have this need of a website, you know, I want to show something like a product, and I want a carousel, and I want a footer, and whatnot, and you guys go and very smartly build that with Vue.js. And you create the repository, you sell the website, they pay you, which is cool, and you, like, everyone is very happy, and you move on with your life. A week later, the client comes up and says, listen, I have this friend that wants to sell more or less the same product, and they really enjoy what you did for us, so they also want a website. And you go ahead and you duplicate the code, create a different repo, and you like just change the colors to green, right? And 2 days later, another client comes up and says the same thing, and you end up duplicating again and create the blue one. You end up having like 3 different repositories with code. What happens then is one of the clients says, I have a bug in the carousel, and now you know that the bug is the same across all your clients, right? And the websites are really similar. Why would you have the same code base duplicated 3 times, right? And I'm here to talk to you about an architecture that can help you try to fix that. Not only, but obviously clients come with requirements, and they say, now I want to evolve my website. And the red one decides on a smaller hero, the green one decides on 2 heroes for whatever reason, and the third one says, I don't want the carousel anymore. And now you end up in a situation where if you don't follow a multi-tenant approach, then the 3 different repositories start diverging a lot, and it's a scaling problem just for you, or maybe your business is doing very well that you need to hire people, all right? Which is good, but like there might be better solutions for it. Really quick on what a multi-tenant is. So there's this book, Building Multi-Tenant SaaS Architectures, very interesting book. It's not to read from one side to the other, it's to consult. And they have a few different solutions on how can you deploy SaaS architectures on AWS that can support multi-tenancy. Things like let's share the same database or not. Let's share some code, and they talk a few things. They show a few very interesting things. And they say, this quote is one of the best quotes of the book that kind of defines what a tenant is. And in summary, it just says it's a unified experience for your clients, basically, from one single code base, right? Cool. What did I use to tackle this problem? Just a bit of context. On hosting.com, it's a hosting brand, and the problem I had was the hosting.com group of companies are in fact 30 different brands around the world, because hosting is an industry that is based on volume, and you cannot have volume with just one brand. You need to have different brands across the world to get the volume you need to create a business. So basically I end up with having 30 different brands, and I just want to have one code base to maintain. Me and my 3 developers on my team, we maintain right now 6 brands, but the architecture can support 30, which is really cool. So what did I use for that? I used PNPM as the package manager instead of NPM. Reason being, like, I don't know if you try to do monorepos with NPM, and it's a bit of a pain. There are other solutions like Turbo, whatever. I use PNPM. There's these workspaces that they support, which is pretty cool, that does monorepos. PNPM catalogs, also very interesting feature on PNPM that I want to show you really quick. So it basically says that you can have a YAML file with a catalog where you define the versions of your packages, and then your tenants can just refer back to catalog, and this is a centralized way for you to maintain your project dependencies, which is pretty cool. And obviously, if one tenant needs a specific version of some package, you obviously can override and not depend on the catalog anymore, which I think is pretty cool. So if you didn't know about that, at least there's that. Nuxt layers. So Nuxt layers is a very interesting technology that was used for the monorepo. It basically says you have a Nuxt app as your base app, as in a package on the monorepo, and then you have all the other packages on the monorepo you want for your clients. And on your Nuxt config, same as Next config, right? You can extend base, and you get inheritance of everything, like all the routing, all the composables, all the hooks, everything that you want will be available on your tenant. And you can, critically, you can override on your client a specific route that you want. So let's say you have an about.view file. You can literally say, I use the about from the base, or I can just redefine my about.view, and it will be overwritten on that specific tenant, which is pretty cool. I use shadcn. I'm going to show a diagram later on where you're going to see these in a much more visual way. But anyway, shadcn was the UI library used. Shadcn is the de facto UI library these days. If you are creating a new project, in my opinion, it does headless components. And it critically depends on a package called CVA. CVA is pretty cool because it allows you to do variants something like this, right? So you have a button, and you give some CSS to that button, semi-bold, border, and then you have some variants that you can say, my primary button will be a background blue, for example. This is really powerful. I know that you're defining CSS on a TS file, but it's really powerful if you want to do inheritance over the base project to the tenants. You can redefine the CSS, and you can have a completely different button for one specific tenant if you want. And this is the base of theming that I'm going to show later on. Obviously, everything is based on Tailwind v4 because it's a new project, and I used v4. Tunstack is here for a quick reference of, if you guys don't know what Tunstack is, you can do server state on the front end. So before using React or Vue, you would use something like Pinia or Redux to maintain your state, and you end up always in a situation like, I have my list of to-dos, so I'm going to create a store that can have my list of to-dos. And then I need one specific to-do, so I'm going to have one store that has that specific ID of that to-do. And then if you move to a different to-do, then you forget about the state of that specific ID one, and then you store the new one that you need. That means you've lost state from before. 10 stack fixes that, maintaining everything that you fetch from the network if you want, configurable on your caching strategy, and you can just have like everything in memory that you are fetching from the network layer. It's pretty cool technology. Have a look. They call it Vue Query, but there's obviously React Query for those of you that use React. Cool. So onto the diagram. I hope you can see that. So there's two main folders, packages and tenants. Obviously on a monorepo architecture, there's the base package and there's the UI package that wraps shadcn. The reason for wrapping shadcn is you might have your own composed UI components that you want to use different components from UI. So you can have like a media object or a profile avatar or whatever that may have a button, and you can have all that UI shared across all your tenants if needed. So I got this line here that says you can still reference the UI package from any tenant. You don't need to rely on base. So if you actually override the about.view page, you can still use your UI components from the UI package to create that about for that specific tenant, which is, in my opinion, really cool for maintainability, extensibility, and personalization of each tenant. This slide shows the architecture for base and the architecture that your tenants can follow. This is obviously my hypothesis for a solution. There's plenty of different solutions in the market. This was the one that I organically got into. So it's an onion/layered based architecture where the topmost layer accesses the next layer, but not the other way around. So you can have your code very structured, and more importantly, it can be structured in a way where your tenant can override it if needed. Right? All the composables, all the routing, all the components, anything that you have can be overwritten by the tenant, which gives you the flexibility on maintaining multiple clients. Cool. So onto the cool part of what I have to show you, which is theming. A CVA function, as I showed you before, this here returns a function. And that's the most important thing you guys need to remember to look at the code that I'm going to show. Why is it important? Because returning that function called button, you can give an argument to the function called button, which is your variant. So let's say if you give an argument of intent with the value primary, then it's going to be rendered. That function is going to return to you a string of Tailwind classes. And that string is going to be composed of these classes and these classes. Why these ones? Because you obviously passed the primary intent, right? It's very important to remember that this is a function. Why is that so important? Because what I do here is maintain a registry of components that have CVA, an array of CVA functions attached to it. That means one button can have the base CVA configuration, shadcn CVA configuration, and your tenant CVA configuration. So if one tenant needs to override the button, it adds that CVA to this registry here. Right? So it says one component called button has an array of CVA configs, right? And that's where you initialize, and that's where you add. If you want to, your tenant will do add CVA config, and it will get the button, the accordion, the whatever component you have with that CVA function. Later on, you do apply variants, and this is the function that does all the magic. So basically, it's going to iterate through, say, you want to apply button, you want to do primary. It's going to go through all the CVA functions that you stored on the registry and compute the CSS, the Tailwind classes. So you will end up here with your class results is literally a map. So you're going to apply the argument to all the functions on the array. It's going to return an array of actual strings. That this is the CSS for base, this is the CSS for shadcn, this is the CSS of the tenant, right? What we'll do then, it's apply the cn function. Cn function is a magic function from Tailwind that does Tailwind merge. What does that mean? The last CSS that you apply to the function cn will be the one that overrides all the other. So if your tenant says that your button background is not blue, it's like red, then that will be the one that overrides all the other CSS that you had before. And that's how you achieve theming. But not only the colors, right? It's literally like you can have buttons that are, say, rounded corners, and other tenant has square corners. You can literally go as far as my button on this tenant, it's all the way over here, and for all the other tenants, it's just on the default place that they inherit from base. And this is what I think it's pretty cool about it. How do you do this? You do a UI config TS file per tenant. Those UI config TS files per tenant have explicit CVAs, like I explained. And then you end up merging and override all the CVAs, and everything is based on Tailwind v4. Why do I have CSS variables there? Because Tailwind v4, in my opinion, is going the right way, and that's how you define a variable for your themes in Tailwind. So literally, your color mint 500 can be blue on any tenant if you want. You just redefine the variable. That's how you inherit it, right? Which is pretty cool. Cool. Deployment strategy, really quick. I'm sorry, that might be too small. Sorry. But I'm going to try to do my best to explain. So on the top, you have more or less the same diagram on the architecture. You have your base package, and then you have all your clients' packages. And the way that you do this deployment is via Git tags. So you configure a pipeline file, say GitHub Action, GitLab YAML, Travis, whatever you guys use. And that pipeline file says something in the lines of, I'm expecting a regex as my trigger point. And my regex is going to listen to all the tags that you do on your repository. So let's say you want to deploy client A, you do client A-v 0.0.1, and the file will pick that up, know that is client A from the regex, and it will deploy client A via your deployment script. In my case, in hosting.com, we use Firebase. This is really powerful using Git tags. Why? Because Git tags are very, very flexible. So remember, you have multi-tenants, right, on your architecture. Some of them might have a staging environment. Some of them might have a testing environment. Some of them might have a specific branch where you're working. It doesn't matter the environments and the branching strategy that you apply. As long as you rely on Git tags, you can tag any branch for any environment. You just need to configure the regex to listen for the right pieces of information. Say, client A-staging will deploy client A on the staging environment. And you maintain all of these dynamically on one file of the pipeline, which, in my opinion, is pretty cool. That's basically what this diagram says, like this is client B staging, client A, client whatever, it doesn't matter. But right now, if you need, like you guys probably have your own branching strategy on your companies, right? Everyone has one. And if you switch to Git tags, you can still maintain that branching strategy, and it will be really seamless to just like transition over having another tenant if you need. Cool. For the future, I have a few things. shadcn view is a package that relies on Reka UI. It's the dependency. And Reka UI has a very interesting function called use for prop emits. Basically, it allows you to proxy all the props and all the emits that one component does over from your wrapper component to shadcn if you need. It's pretty interesting. You can go have a look. Modularity for tenants is something that I didn't cover on this talk, which is about if one tenant needs one specific module, how do you do the negative? So I told you how to do the positive, as in, if I want a tenant to override the about.view, I just redefine it. But what if I don't want the about view at all? This architecture doesn't solve that problem yet. So you will always inherit from base the about.view. And modularity is a problem that might be fixed with this library called Castle. Castle is a role-based, is a role a library that fixes roles. So basically can do feature flagging, for example. You say tenant A can have the permission to access XYZ, whatever you want. Have a look. Castle is pretty cool. It's available for React, Vue, whatever. Shared types package is here because if you have a monorepo architecture like mine, you can have a server package if you want to have your own API next to your front end. And if you have your API, you can have a types package that you share the types from front end to back end, which is pretty cool. And I leave you guys with the question of what happens at 30 tenants, right? Right now I have 6. Don't forget that I deploy using tags. If I want to deploy all 30 clients on the same commit, it means that commit will have 30 tags on it, which might not be the best maintainability possible. Food for thought. That's basically it. I have the monorepo template for multi-tenant on this GitHub, and you can find my talk on my GitHub. And that's what I have for you today. Thank you.